We are back here on our program, Jones and Company, in the final segment of our program as we continue our conversation with Mr. Fred Mitchell. Senator, statecraft. From my experience in journalism and watching politicians in this country, few of them understand it. And you have made some points on this program today about the insurance, for instance. I just wonder, sir, the level of preparedness on the part of politicians and people who have positions in the government of the Bahamas, whether they understand our country, they understand our region, and the way we ought to be governing ourselves.
Well, it's a very glamorous job. I mean, I wonder why, there must be gold in the House of Assembly, I said the last time, the number of people who want to run for the House, and that's fine. It's good that people want to be involved in democracy. But it isn't just jumping up in the House of Assembly and then spouting off your mouth saying anything you want to say, and I think that's what most people see. It's just, great, I can get up and I can sound off and say whatever I want to say. No, you're actually trying to do things, the Constitution says, for the peace and good order of the country. So it means that you have to have a familiarization with its institutions, how they work, how they interact, and then how to mobilize people behind objectives. And I think that too often people just pop up, and particularly given the level of dissatisfaction that the public had for the Progressive Liberal Party in the last, as evidenced in the result of the last campaign, you can just get very lucky and come with a wave, and then you have this huge majority, 35-4, and then you think that you are the Messiah, that you know everything, that you've descended from heaven, and that everything that you say is just littered with gold. And of course, that's not true. That's not so. The problems remain, and the problems are practical problems, as Marvin Dames, the Minister of National Security, is now finding out, as Jeff Lloyd. I tease him in other fora by saying, you're no longer, a talk show host. It's not you as Minister of Education describing problems anymore. Mr. Minister, the school is leaking, the roof got to be fixed. And you can't be sounding off and saying, education for our children must be this and that and so on and so forth. But it's your job to fix it now. And that's the issue. So I've had the opportunity in the last days to speak to the politics and government class at the University of the Bahamas. I gave them this story. I said, look, gentlemen, ladies, when I taught this class in the spring of 1988, subbing for Felix Bethel, there were two people that I remember from that class in particular. One was Mike Halkitis, the other was Reynard Rigby. Within 13 years of their leaving the University of the Bahamas, Mike Halkitis was a parliamentary secretary and a member of parliament, and Reynard Rigby was the chairman of the governing party. And I said, when they got there, they had to have a fixed idea of what it is they were going to do and try to accomplish. I said, so you have a very short time in between where you are now and the time when your time comes up to the plate. And you've got to, this is the time now for you to be thinking about, how do I solve these problems? What do I do? I'm here to tell you in this class, not why things are the way they are. I'm just telling you what they are. These are the institutions. This is how it works. You're in the midst of the Pax Americana. The Pax Americana operates in a certain way in the international arena, and the local arena has a certain way it interacts with, and you have to learn that. And when you get there, your feet running straight away. There's no time to think anymore.
Mr. Mitchell, when Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa to India, the first thing he did, he toured India. But he went to the Bahamas, right? And that's a big problem. You got to know your country if you want to serve your country. All right? Now how are you going to fix that, Mr. Mitchell?
Well, I tried in my limited way, and got a lot of grief ex post facto for this. But every time I traveled as minister, we took a Foreign Service officer with me, in addition to the aides who traveled with me. The reason, and it was done on a rotation. And the reason that was done
To expose them.
was to expose them to how being a minister actually operates, because one day one of them may be a minister, or to see how you do logistics for a trip when you're going overseas, to meet people in other islands and get to know them, and so you can always call on them because you develop relationships. Because I said to them, you know, the Bahamas is a country which is run by the consent of the governed. This is not a dictatorship. This is a democracy, and so therefore, and it's not just Nassau. So that was one of the ways. And I was just surprised at the number of people who had never been to Freeport. I mean, I just can't imagine that you have never been to Freeport. I mean, this whole place that was invented out of the pine forest in 1955, which is a miracle city, and people have not seen it. The kids from the basketball team at Doris Johnson, I mean, they couldn't believe it when they landed there and saw the roads. I mean, they thought, gee, you know, this is actually the Bahamas.
Yeah. People don't understand the
Yes,
country.
right.
Don't know the country.
You have people in policy positions in this country don't know the country.
You have people in the Parliament of the Bahamas who don't know the country, who have not been to most of the islands of the Bahamas.
Right.
And they're making
Policy decisions
and laws for the Bahamas. They don't know the country.
So when we did the select committee request, the select committee on the benefits of parliamentarians, one of the things we got the F&M to agree to, and it was adopted by the parliament, is that members of parliament should have, for themselves and an aide, the ability to travel once a month on Bahamas Air at the expense of the government. Because we felt that members of parliament and senators represent, I mean, even though you're elected on the basis of a geographical constituency, you in fact represent the whole Bahamas. And so you ought to have the opportunity to be able to go across the whole Bahamas during the tenure of your senatorship or your membership in the House.
Mr. Mitchell, there's one criticism I have of the PLP. I think the PLP, yeah, just one at this time. And that criticism is that I think one of the mistakes the PLP made was it engendered in the electorate this feeling of entitlement. All right?
Yeah.
And the example Wendell uses is that if his house roof blows off, you expect him to fix it.
Yeah, I found that.
But many people in this country expects the government to fix it.
Yeah, I found that, and that's a difficult problem to overcome. But
no, but it's been engendered by the political director itself.
well, I would use that as a more generic term, you know, because as you speak, I remember, and I tell this to the younger ones in the PLP who are railing against all of these practices, because I think they think many of the things are unfair that constituents ask you about. And one of them is that the favorite whipping boy of the younger ones is giving out hams and turkeys at Christmas time. Mm-hmm. And I said to them, you know, I was 21 years old and I'm sitting in front of Sir Lyndon Pinling and I'm doing the same thing. I'm saying, aren't you ashamed of yourself, you know, giving out turkeys and hams at Christmas time? He says, when are you all going to end this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And he sits there and he looks at me with this bemused look. He says, my friend, you know, maybe in your lifetime, not in mine. And he just chuckled, right? And now I'm sitting telling these younger ones, I say, my brother, you know, maybe in your lifetime, not in mine. That's just one of these practices amongst others.
But aren't you responsible as a policymaker, as a politician in the country, to inspire people and to get them to aspire to certain things, to change their mindset about how we do politics and how we do government in the Bahamas. Because all of these parties are about the same thing. I mean, there were some people who came down, who were evacuated from Acklands, who didn't want to go back, and they thought that the government should take care of them Why don't we disabuse people of this notion in the Bahamas
Entanglement.
that the government is supposed to do everything for them?
Well, I think the problem is that it comes back again to where are the independent civic voices to make this point? Because the problem is the politician is in the midst of the vortex, so to speak. And it's difficult to make that decision if you're in the vortex. But if there's some support which is coming forward, but I'm sure that, you go and make that decision, then the word goes out, so-and-so is mean, he don't do this, and so on and so forth. Who wants to
I think the problem is that too many politicians go there and they work for their re-election
Right.
rather than working for the smooth governance of the country.
Well,
you're concerned
well,
about being
Being
re-elected.
yeah.
Well, I mean, that's part of being a politician. If you want to be a politician, you want to be reelected. That's so. And statesmen only
Yeah,
become.
but what about the national interest?
No, but the two are not mutually exclusive, though. They're not mutually exclusive. You can work toward reelection even as you try to reform, and reform is incremental. That's what I'm saying. There are very few occasions when there's going to be a revolution. Very few occasions, but bit by bit. And that's why the youngsters are your solution, ultimately. The youngsters are your solution. And I say to them each time, these are some things you got to tackle.
But the democracy works best, Mr. Mitchell, when people are properly educated, properly informed about how their country works.
Sure.
We cannot have a proper democracy when people do not understand the country, they are not educated about the government or governance in the country. How can you get proper governments when people are ignorant about how these things are supposed to be operated?
No, I'm with you, and that's a very complex problem that the Ministry of Education and others have to suggest. But I suffer from the same issue. I mean, that kids who, for example, live in Foxhill, which is the center of the Emancipation Day celebrations and observances, but don't know what is Emancipation Day. You go to the school and say, what is Emancipation Day?
It's a holiday.
No idea what the date is. In one case, it was actually, the reason I asked the question is because the date was actually up on the wall, saying 1st August, 1834, Emancipation Day. And they passed this sign up and down every day. I asked them, what is Emancipation Day? They don't know. University students don't know. What is GDP per capita?
Then you should fire the headmistress or headmaster.
No, I mean, but I'm
That's
saying,
their responsibility, Minister.
No, I understand, but it's the state of things. So, to a certain extent, politicians have to deal with the state of things as they find them. And often you end up, as a practical matter, taking the line of least resistance.
Mr. Mitchell, we have come to the end of the program, and I know that Godfrey wants to ask you about 10 more questions, and I have about 20 more, but we are
Once he doesn't have any criticisms of the PLP, I said only one.
Oh, we have many criticisms of the PLP, and we didn't reach to some of these criticisms today, so we need you to come back soon.
Look, and I think I just want to say, fine, it's just a great organization. It's not a perfect organization, and I think people working on reforms, regardless of who wins the leadership race. And I commend the organization to this country. It's needed, and we are coming back, and I think we'll do better next time.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Godfrey. Thank you for watching and listening to our program. Good evening, everyone.